Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in my series of March of the Machine Commander deck techs. I've covered every legendary creature from March of the Machine's main set, the extra legends from Mom Jumpstart, and the special pre-release promos, and now I'm doing the 5 non-face legends from the Mom Commander product. Check out the playlist in the video's description to see the decks I've made so far, and if you have a request for the last 4 that I'm about to build, let me know in the comments below. As you see, today our commander is Elenda and Azor, respectively the progenitor of all the vampires in the Legion of Dusk on Ixalan, and the former planeswalker who founded the Azorius Senate on Ravnica. Elenda was originally a warrior nun who guarded the immortal sun in the Torazon Mountains, but when it was stolen, she used dark magic to become an undying vampire so she could prolong her quest to get it back. Little did she know, the immortal sun was crafted by Azor through the sacrifice of his planeswalker spark as part of a scheme with Ugin to trap Nicol Bolas. These two characters are both cool in very different ways, and played important roles in the original Ixalan block, and I'm excited to share what I cooked up for their March of the Machine Team Up card. But before we get started, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my deck around my commander. I want to show off why it's such a cool card, and why I put it at the head of my deck. So I put 30 cards toward doing whatever it wants me to do. This is our game plan. It's what we do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction pieces. This is a little bit of a strange deck for this template, but trust me, it works. I usually run 1 or 2 sweepers, sometimes more if it would play into the game plan, sometimes none at all, but I almost always keep to a floor of 38 lands, so I can make sure I hit my land drops, so I can cast my spells, so I can, play commander. So let's talk about our team-up commander. Elenda and Azor is a 6/6 legendary Vampire Knight Sphinx for 3 and Esper, a white, a blue, and a black. It has flying and ward 2. It says whenever Elenda and Azor attacks, we can pay X and an Esper to draw X cards, and at the beginning of each end step, we can pay 4 life. If we do, we make a number of 1/1 black Vampire Knight creature tokens with lifelink equal to the number of cards we've drawn this turn. And I know you're thinking, does it really say each end step? Like every player's end step? Yes, it does. Don't worry, I haven't gone that deep with it. So on the surface, our commander is a pretty simple combination of its constituent creatures. Its attack trigger is a reference to Sphinx's Revelation, giving us a way to put cards in our hand, and its end-step trigger refers to the many knightly, if colonialist, vampires of the Church of Dusk. It even links these together by basing the number of tokens it makes on the number of cards we've drawn, as well as giving those tokens lifelink so we can sort of get a refund on the 4 mana activation cost by attacking with those tokens next turn. But it only takes a second glance to see that this card cares about a lot of things. It wants us to pay life, so it incentivizes us to gain it in ways other than just our lifelinking tokens. Those tokens are both vampires and knights, supportable creature types that our commander shares. And since those tokens come about as a result of drawing cards, it makes us want to maximize the number of cards we draw each turn. On top of all that, it's an expensive commander that nevertheless protects itself and has some built-in evasion. So what's that? Big draw, tokens, life gain, 2 overlapping Typal emphases, and evasion, plus the need for mana acceleration and early game plays that scale into the mid and late game. Now obviously we could pare these things down. We could maybe build a vampires deck, filling up on white and black bloodsuckers and using our blue mana to draw a bunch of cards based on our kindred. Or we could eschew the Typal strategy and cram our deck full of every wheel effect and anthem we can afford, trusting that we'll have enough tokens to see us through to the end. Heck, it'd be more than fair to acknowledge that an expensive commander is kind of a liability, so we could build a right-down-the-middle deck, enhanced by Elenda and Azor, without relying on it. These are all smart ideas. But here at Second Monitor Magic, we aren't about smart ideas. Like I said in the breakdown of my deck building template, we're about building around the commander. Elenda and Azor is a cool card. We should want to show it off. And how do we show off a card that does so much? We build a deck that does it all. In this video, you'll see Typal strategies for both knights and vampires. You'll see acceleration that doesn't just push out our 6-drop commander early, it does so by feeding those types. We care about gaining life, and since we're playing vampires, we also care about draining our opponents. Some of that drain comes when we attack with our knights too, as well as unexpected evasion and protection spells. We have cards that make tokens that care about our other creatures, cards that care about how wide we can go, cards that make all our creatures, token and otherwise, get swole, and even cards that reward us for those tokens hitting our playmat in the first place. And behind all of this is an enormous suite of draw spells to keep our hand full and trigger our commander's in-step ability, ensuring that every time we pay 4 life, we're getting a great deal. This deck is a blast to play. It typifies the emphasis on variety in the format, as no game with it really plays the same, and the amount of built-in card advantage keeps every game smooth. This is the kind of deck you pull out when you want a solid, surprising game of Commander, one in which your opponents ask to read your cards when they first come down, and ask a second time when those cards start killing them. Each of them supports and is supported by the others, a ziggurat of value stacked on top of each other, with our Commander at the top. They are ringed by guardians, knights on the ground and vampires in the air, and the trifecta of draw effects, token generation, and Typal synergies combines to make them an indestructible beacon of light, a kind of deathless guiding star, there we go. Don't worry, this isn't in the deck. We have too many vampires to keep a sun so close, no matter how chivalrous they may be. After all, they only come out at night. You'll enjoy this deck if you like a broad strategy that comes together in an inevitable, if unpredictable, pile of value, or if you've ever been excited by a card that asks way too much of you, and you want to live the dream by doing all of it. So, as usual, this Moxfield list we're going over today is linked in the video's description. At the bottom of it, below the deck list, you will see a considering section filled with cards that I wanted to include, but ultimately decided against in order to make our deck what it is. But if you have a bigger budget or a smaller one, if you have a strategy or a type that you want to focus on more than I did, or if you have a completely different angle you want to approach this deck with entirely, that considering section is a great place for you to start for inspiration when you build your own Elenda and Azor deck. So we're going to get started with our first Typal synergy, which is our knights. There we go. So these are all knight cards, with the exception of the first one. This is a little bit involved, so let's get into it. This is Invasion of New Phyrexia, a battle. This is a siege type of battle. The way this works is it comes down, we choose an opponent who will protect it, and it's 6 defense counters. We and everyone one other than that opponent can attack it if we like. That opponent can defend it by blocking for it the way they would block for a planeswalker they control. And then when we do damage to it, or when anyone does damage to it, that damage takes away from its defense counters, and once it's defeated, we exile it, and we can cast it transformed without paying any kind of mana cost. And we'll get Teferi. So when Evasion of New Phyrexia comes down, it costs X, a blue, and a white, giving us a number of 2/2 white and blue knight creature tokens with vigilance equal to X. So we can pay just a white and a blue for this, and it will come down and make no knights for us. But if we want to pump a bunch of mana into it, and we probably will, we get a bunch of knights for our trouble. 2/2s with vigilance are pretty sweet, especially if we're paying just 1 mana for them after we pay the original 2. Once we defeat the Invasion of New Phyrexia, it flips over in Teferi Akosa of Jalfir, which is a Teferi planeswalker with 4 loyalty and 3 abilities. For +1 loyalty, we can draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards unless we discard a creature card, which I believe is a spell now called Search for Identity. In any case, the discarding of a card is not a big deal for us. Yes, we don't have a whole lot of ways to recur cards from our graveyard, but we sure do care about drawing them, because every card we draw is another token we can make at the end step that adds to the number of tokens we might be making from other sources, or from other draw sources, I should say, thanks to our commander. Usually, I want to shoot for a minimum of 3 tokens if I'm paying 4 life to get them, and I usually feel best if I'm getting at least 4 tokens. So since we're drawing a card at the start of our turn anyway, drawing 2 more here from Teferi gets us almost all the way there, and 3 tokens sometimes is worth it. Having to discard a creature card in order to get that, or just discard 2 cards, I mean, this is faithless looting. If we're drawing 2 and discarding 2, that's good card selection at the very least, plus, of course, getting our commander's final ability online. We can also -2 Teferi to get an emblem with knights we control, get +1/+0, and have Ward of 1 generic mana. So a little bit of protection and a little bit of pump for all of our knights, And over time, we can keep getting more of these emblems, giving additional ward and additional pump in a way that can't be interacted with. We can also -3 Teferi to tap any number of untapped creatures we control, and when we do, we shuffle a non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value X or less into its owner's library, where X is the number of creatures we tap this way. So we basically -3 Teferi and then convoke away something of our opponents by making them shuffle it into their library. If we want, we can tap no creatures and shuffle away something that's mana value 0. So if an opponent's playing like, a bauble, I guess they'd probably sack it in response. But I mean, a token that's not a copy of something, mana value 0, that seems good. But in any case, typically what we do with Teferi is we'll either drop him or, get him in after we've defeated the Invasion of New Phyrexia and activate his -3 to get rid of something, since we're going to have plenty of tokens from our commander that we can tap for this. And then we just keep plussing him to draw ourselves cards, give ourselves card selection, activate our commander's last ability, or empower it, I should say. And it's also fine if we don't want to use this removal effect to just give ourselves an emblem from the start and then just +1 Teferi until we're ready to give ourselves another emblem and keep plussing Teferi and going back and forth between the two. Also a fine choice. Next up, we have Knight of the White Orchid. This is 2 white mana for a 2/2 first striking human knight that when it enters, if an opponent controls more lands than us, we can search our library for a plains, put it on the battlefield, and shuffle. This is excellent. This is a catch-up mechanic. We can't actually use this to ramp ourselves unless an opponent already has more lands in play than us. But maybe it's turn 2, and we could play the knight, but we wait until turn 3, so that an opponent has been able to play their, and assuming we're not the first player, someone might have just gotten their 3rd land out before us. We might have a 3rd land in hand, but we played the Knight of the White Orchid first, let it tutor us up a plains, put it on the battlefield, and then make our land drop, so now we are accelerated. We just have to do it in the right way. It's also worth noting that it does not say a basic plains, so we can find a dual type land, of which we have a few, and it goes straight on the battlefield untapped. So if that land we find would come in tapped on its own, then it does come in tapped. But if we find one that doesn't come in tapped on its own, or just a basic plains, we get it into play and we can use it right away. Sweet. Legion Lieutenant is next. This is one of our vampires and knights. 1 and a black for a 2/2 vampire knight that gives all of our vampires +1/+1. We do have anthem effects for our knights, but most of them are centered in our vampires in this deck, simply because it gets a little annoying if you have to sort of separate out your creatures and say, okay, these creatures are vampires, so they are getting these anthem effects. These creatures are knights, so they are getting these other ones, and then the ones in the middle are getting both. We have a little bit of that, and there's a good reason for it, but for the most part, we're getting our most pure stat bonuses from our vampires. It is worth noting that those creatures in the middle that get the both bonuses, that includes our commander, and that includes all the tokens they make. Smitten Swordmaster is next. 1 and a black for a 2/1 lifelinking human knight is pretty okay, but it has an adventure as well, which is Curry Favor. The way adventures work is, when this is in your hand, you can either cast the Swordmaster, which means you ignore the adventure, or you can send him on an adventure first, meaning you cast the sorcery, and when you do, you then exile this card and you can cast the creature side from exile. You don't even have to wait till another turn if you've got the mana for it now. But you can't cast the creature first and then the adventure. He's either got to go on his adventure or show up on your board. And that's what you can do. He'll either show up from the adventure or from your hand. So there you go. Curry Favor is a single black for a sorcery that says you gain X life, and each opponent loses X life, where X is the number of knights you control. Obviously, it doesn't count the Smitten Swordmaster because he's not in play when we're casting Curry Favor. However, early game, this might not be anything, so we might just want to drop the Swordmaster. Late game, we might have 10 Vampire Knight tokens from our commander. We might have 20 of them. Curry Favor might be a single black mana that gains us a bunch of life and kills all of our opponents, or at least one of them. If we've gotten our opponents down, or if they've just gotten down from us and our opponents, and our mutual opponents, So yeah, Curry Favor can do an awful lot of work for a single mana if we've got plenty of knights in play, and we will. Next up is Exsanguinator Cavalry. 2 and a black for a 2/3 Vampire Knight with Menace and Lifelink. And it says, whenever a knight we control deals combat damage to a player, we put a +1/+1 counter on that creature and create a blood token. Blood tokens are artifacts with pay a mana, tap it, and discard a card, and sacrifice it to draw a card. I know that's a lot, but it's sort of us getting a chance to rummage for 1 mana, of discarding a card to draw a card. So not only is this creature able to gain its life on its own, and it's a little evasive, it also triggers every knight we have to get counters and to make these blood tokens. Getting our knights bigger and bigger every time is pretty sweet, especially because it works on itself as well. And having these blood tokens is also nice, because it means if we've got just a couple of cards in hand, but plenty of mana, we can just use those cards to cycle. You know, just pay 1, tap, sack the blood token, discarding one of our cards to draw a card. That means we've drawn 1 more card in our turn. If we've got like 8 blood tokens, which is not hard for us to get to with all the knights we're making, we might just throw away 3 blood tokens or 5 blood tokens with 3 or 5 mana respectively, and just draw a card and discard that card, draw a card and discard that card, basically making almost no changes to our hand. And eventually, we've drawn so many cards that at the end step, we can pay 4 life, and now we've got a huge number of tokens, all of which are knights that we can attack with, and they may get blocked, but if they don't, they'll do combat damage to a player and get bigger and make more blood tokens. This idea of the cards we have in our hand being less important than the fact that we've drawn them is a big part of this deck. And we don't have so much in this deck that is likely to make us deck ourselves, like mill ourselves out, but we can certainly get close, especially if we're empowering Elenda and Azor and making so many tokens that we can overwhelm our opponents in the process, and Exsanguinator Cavalry does a good job of helping us with that. So yeah, very nice. Plus, extra artifact tokens lying around, we have a couple of ways to use those. Next up is Knight Exemplar. This is one of our 2 Knight Lords. 1 and double white for a 2/2 human knight with first strike, and other knight creatures you control get +1/+1/+1 and have indestructible. This applies to all of our knight tokens, every one of our knights except for the Exemplar, and that also means our commander. So this protects our commander, making them a little bit bigger, but also it takes all of our 1/1 knight tokens and makes them indestructible 2/2s. That seems pretty great. They've already got lifelink, so we might as well swing in with all of them. Dion Bahamut's Dominant is next. This is a Final Fantasy card. I am not a Final Fantasy guy. If you know what this guy's deal is, cool. You know, if you want to let me know in the comments, feel free. What his deal is, from what I can tell, is he's 3 and a white for a 3/3 legendary human noble knight with Dragonfire Dive. During our turn, he and all of our knights have flying. It's one of the 2 ways we have in the deck to give really solid evasion to all of our knights. And when he enters, we make a 2/2 white knight creature token. So I'm pretty used to seeing 4 mana spells, like 3 and a colored mana, to make a 2/2 that comes in with a 2/2. Dion is a 3 and a colored mana spell that's a 3/3 that comes in with a 2/2, gives himself and that 2/2 and all of our other knights flying, and still has further text. This is crazy for a 20-cent card. The other text is, for 4 and double white, we can tap and exile Dion, then return it to the battlefield transformed under our control as a sorcery. He transforms into a saga creature. So sagas, as maybe you know, you put a lore counter on it when it comes in and at the start of your first main phase. After the final chapter ability has resolved, if it's still on the battlefield, you sacrifice the saga. But you want to do that with Bahamut, or Bahamut being Dion's backside. So he is a 5/5 flyer. But because we exiled him to bring him back transformed, that first turn he comes in, we won't be able to attack with him, but we can the second turn. So that first and second chapter ability is called Wings of Light. We put a 1/1 counter on each other creature we control, and those creatures get flying until end of turn, not just our knights, so we can pump everyone up and swing in evasively. And then finally, third chapter is Giga Flare. We destroy a permanent. This hits lands. Don't destroy your opponent's lands unless your pod is okay with that. Just blow up the things that's scariest. And exile Bahamut and return to the battlefield as Dion. When that happens, Dion will enter, and we will make another knight, and it'll still be our turn, so Dion's going to give himself and all of our other knights flying. If we want, if we've got the mana for it, when Dion doesn't have summoning sickness anymore, we can do this all again. Just activate it again and get back on the escalator. This is a really cool card, and I'm excited to see, more of how well it plays. It's done well in some of my other decks. Next up, we have an Assassin's Creed card. This is 2, a white and a blue, for a 3/3 legendary human knight named Haytham Kenway. I don't know who this is either, so let me know in the comments if you like this character from Assassin's Creed. Because it has protection from assassins. Seems good. And other knights we control have protection from assassins and get +2/+2. So this is our other lord for knights. +2/+2 is very strong. In addition, when Haytham Kenway enters, we get to Banishing Light a creature off of every other player's playmat. Or like Banish a Priest. Basically, we exile them until Haytham leaves the battlefield. So Haytham is there giving all of our knights, which include our tokens and our commander, +2/+2, and I guess protection from assassins. And we hide we hide a creature from each of our opponent's board under Haytham. So if we get their commanders with this, they're going to have to choose to either leave them under Haytham or put them in the command zone, which means they're going to have to recast them at a higher tax, and that's just annoying to have to deal with. But if we hit their commanders and they leave them under Haytham, or we don't hit their commanders, we hit something else that's threatening, then Haytham is an egg that one of our players is going to want to pop, because it stops us from having this +2/+2 anthem effect and frees their creatures. Meaning Haytham is a removal magnet, which means they're using removal on something that isn't our commander, or isn't one of our other pieces that's so strong for us. So Haytham is great when it's alive, and it's great when it dies for us. Next, we have Herald of Hoofbeats, our other really good Evasion knight. This card is so cool. 3 and a blue for a 3/3 human knight with horsemanship, and other knights you control have horsemanship. Horsemanship is flying. This creature can't be blocked except by creatures with horsemanship. Or rather, it's got the same type of rules text as flying. It's not the same as flying. Flyers can't block creatures with horsemanship unless those flyers themselves have horsemanship. Horsemanship is a little seen mechanic in Magic. And it means if our opponents don't have any creatures with horsemanship, our creatures are unblockable, because there's no version of Reach for horsemanship. I guess Reach itself should block creatures with horsemanship, but it doesn't, so Herald of Hoofbeats makes our entire board unblockable. By the time our commander's out and we have some tokens, if Herald of Hoofbeats comes down, that means our whole board is unblockable, and that might be the end of the game for one or more opponents. Just a very strong card, and a really interesting, flavorful, unique effect. So I really wanted to include it, even though at about $5 or more, I typically don't put cards in my decks that aren't usable in multiple decks. This one, not really great for decks that aren't about knights, that, includes blue, but just such a cool, unique effect that I didn't want to leave it out. Next up, Kinsbane Cavalier, or Kinsbale Cavalier, I'm sorry. 3 and a white for a 2/2 Kithkin Knight. This is the special guest printing from Lorwyn Eclipsed. You can go with whatever printing you want. I just thought this was pretty cool. That gives all of our knights double strike. That includes itself. That seems pretty great. Being able to swing in with all of our lifelinking tokens with double strike, like a 1/1 lifelinker with double strike, is pretty good. 10 of them is amazing. This also affects our commander, which is a flying 6/6, and having double strike is pretty great. So yeah, excellent card. That is another removal magnet. If an opponent wants to blow up our commander because they're sick of being hit for 12 in the air with our commander, that's fine. That means all of our other knights continue to have double strike. But if our opponent wants to use their removal on the Cavalier itself, well, that's fine too. We get to keep our commander. Either way, it works for us. Sanctum Seeker is next. This is 2 and double black for a 3/4 Vampire Knight. This is whenever a vampire we control attacks, each opponent loses a life and we gain a life. This is just draining our opponents, as vampires ought to do. But it works for all of our vampires, including the Sanctum Seeker, our commander, all of our tokens, anything else. We also have an effect like this for knights, which we'll see soon. Vidalian Wave Knight is another cool one that's really probably only good in this kind of deck, but just really sweet. 2 a white and a blue for a 3/3 Merfolk Knight that says whenever we draw a card, we put a 1/1 counter on each other Merfolk, not that useful in our deck, or Knight, very useful in our deck that we control. This is our commander, this is all of our tokens, every one of our knights. We get counters on whenever we draw a card, and this is a big part of what we're doing every turn once we get our commander out. Next up, we have one of the Cavalier cycle from M20. This is the one that works best for us. I think it's just really cool. 2 and triple blue for a 5/5 flying elemental knight called Cavalier of Gales. When it enters, we brainstorm. We draw 3 and then put 2 cards from our hand on top of our library in any order. They do not have to be 2 cards from the 3 that we drew, so we just set up our next 2 draws for whatever we need. But it still counts, even though we're only up 1 card, as drawing 3, which, with our card draw for our draw step, gets us to the point that we've drawn 4 cards during our turn, so at our end step we can pay 4 life and get 4 tokens. And that sets us right up for it. Pretty good. And when the Cavalier of Gales dies, we shuffle it into its owner's library and then scry 2. So, not that big of a deal for us. Nice to be able to set up our next draw, but also nice to know that this is still in our library. We could find it again, possibly. At the very least, it's not gone forever, and we get to set up our next couple of draws. I like that. Finally, in this section, we have Champion of Dusk. 3 and double black for a 4/4 Vampire Knight, another one of these, that when it enters, we draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of vampires we control. This could be quite a lot of life, but also quite a lot of cards. And if let's say we have, 15 total vampires in play, which is not hard with all the tokens we're making, we're going to lose 15 life. But then we're going to draw 15 cards, which means we're going to be making at least 16 of those tokens during our next turn, or during our end step, rather, since it's the 15 from this and 1 for our draw step. That will cost us another 4 life, so that's already 19 life we've lost. But next turn, all we have to do is attack with those, and we've gotten 16 of it back. Pretty good. And we've got plenty of other ways to draw cards, but also gain life. So I'm not worried about the Champion of Dusk drawing us out. And if it would, we just don't play it until it's of use to us. So yeah, that is our last knight in our knights section. We're going to go now, since we're talking about knights, to our Typal section for knights. It is here. There we go. So these are cards that, many of these are knights. In fact, almost all of them are knights. Yeah. But these are also cards that care about knights and do things based on the knights we have, or when we have knights do their own thing. So we've seen Teferi. Teferi can give us an emblem. They gives all our knights +1/+0 and ward 1. Smith Swordmaster is Curry Favor Adventure, drains our opponents for an amount equal to the number of knights we control. Exsanguinator Cavalry gives us a counter on any knight that we control that deals combat damage to a player and makes a blood token when that happens. Knight Exemplar is a lord for our knights and gives them indestructible. Dion makes them fly. Hatham Kenway gives +2/+2 and protection from assassins to our knights. Herald of Hoofbeats gives our knights horsemanship. Kinsbale Cavalier gives them double strike. Vidalian Wave Knight puts counters on them whenever we draw a card. And Knight's Charge is that card I mentioned that does the drain each opponent whenever a knight we control attacks. So we have this for vampires and for knights. Also, this is an enchantment for 1 a white and a black. It also is our only recursion spell in the deck. For 6 a white and a black, and sacrifice it, we can return all knight creature cards from our graveyard to the battlefield. So that's 8 mana. That's a lot of mana. But our commander is 6 mana. So if it dies once, returning it to the battlefield or casting it again, I should say, from our command zone is also 8 mana. So if our commander dies from a board wipe or something, we should just put it in the graveyard and sack Knight's Charge to bring it back, because it will bring back all the other knight creature cards that might have died with it. Obviously, if there weren't any, then we don't have to worry about it. We've got plenty of knights in this deck, though. So it might be worth spending this much mana, which is the same amount we'd have to spend anyway to recast our commander, to get our commander back with our other knights. Or we could just cast it again from the command zone, and if it happens to die a second time, at that point we use this and pay 8 rather than 10. Just pretty useful. We really got this in here for this effect, but you never know if we're going to need that recursion. So that is our knight Typal section. Let's talk about our other type now. It's vampires. Here we go. We've got 10 vampire cards in here. Cordial Vampire, who is so polite, is double black for a 1/1 vampire that says whenever this creature or another creature dies, put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control. That is this vampire, on our commander, on all of our tokens, each vampire. But what matters is it triggers whenever any creature dies. If that creature is a token, doesn't matter. If that creature is controlled by another player, doesn't matter. If we have one opponent attack a different opponent, and they both have, a total of 6 creatures die among them, then Cordial Vampire is going to trigger 6 times and put 6 +1/+1 counters on itself and every other vampire we control. Very powerful way to get our vampires bigger and bigger and bigger. Legion Lieutenant, we've already seen. It gives all of our vampires an Anthem effect of +1/+1. Captivating Vampire does as well, but also has the ability that we can tap 5 untapped vampires we control to gain control of target creature, and it becomes a vampire in addition to its other types. Now, adding the vampire type to that creature is pretty sweet. It makes it so it's affected by all of our Anthem effects. It's also affected by things like Sanctum Seeker, so when that creature attacks, each opponent's going to lose 1 and will gain 1. But most importantly, it doesn't say until end of turn. So we tap maybe just 5 of our Vampire Knight tokens and just steal an opponent's commander permanently. It hasn't changed zones, it's just changed controller rather. So they can't put it in the command zone in response. Or we steal one of our opponent's biggest, scariest things, their Cityscape Leveler, their Galta Primal Hunger, whatever you want to say. And whatever we get becomes a vampire that we can use to do vampire things. Captivating Vampire is pretty sweet. Next up is Exsanguinator Cavalry. We've already seen it. Vampire Knight does cool things for our knights, just like we have several knights that do cool things for our vampires. Welcoming Vampire is next. 2 and a white for a 2/3 vampire with flying that says whenever 1 or more other creatures we control with power 2 or less enter, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So once per turn, we get a bonus card draw just for having one of our creatures come in. Even if this is just at our end step, when our commander makes some tokens for us, so it's drawing us that card after we would have been able to use that card draw for our commander, that's still fine. We have plenty of creatures that do have power 2 or less that will come in earlier, even other tokens made other ways. But we also have a bunch of Anthem effects. Captivating Vampire, Legion Lieutenant, you'll see some more, and Cordial Vampire putting counters on things that might push our vampires out of this range. Even our tokens that our commander makes might come in as, 3/3s or bigger, which means the Welcoming Vampire won't be drawing us cards anymore. If that's the case, in all likelihood, our vampires are all getting such big buffs that our Welcoming Vampire is no longer a flying 2/3, it's like a flying 4/5 or 5/6, at which point it's useful in a different way. It's a good flying blocker, it's a good flying attacker, and if there are ways we can have other creatures that come in that might be, a 2/2 knight that's not getting any bonuses from our anthems for vampires, Welcoming Vampire might still be drawing us cards, just less frequently, since it's changed into a flying beater. That seems good too. Bloodline Keeper is next. This is 2 and double black for a 3/3 vampire with flying that all we have to do to make a 2/2 black vampire creature token with flying is tap it. Just once per turn, make another one of these. This is a Winddrake vampire. That's pretty great. And for a single black, we can transform it, but only if we have 5 or more vampires. Super easy to do, considering it's a vampire and so is our commander. So are all those tokens that they're making. It flips into Lord of Lineage, a 5/5 flying vampire that gives all of our vampires +2/+2 and still taps to make a 2/2 flying vampire. So, which of course gets the benefit of this, so it's a 4/4 vampire, which is a 4/4 flyer. It's an angel. That's crazy. So yeah, Lord of Lineage, very strong for us. Great way to keep populating us with more tokens. If we don't flip it, those tokens will trigger the Welcoming Vampire on its own without any kind of other Anthem effects going on. Very strong card. We've seen Sanctum Seeker, drains our opponents when our vampires attack. Wisp Drinker Vampire is kind of a combination of Sanctum Seeker and Welcoming Vampire in a way. This is 2 a white and a black for a 2/4 flying vampire rogue that says whenever another creature we control with power 2 or less enters, each opponent loses a life and we gain life. So we're draining opponents by having small creatures come in. They could be vampires, they could be knights, they could be vampire knights that our commander's making. If our commander makes 10 of those vampire knights, which maybe they will if we've drawn 10 cards at the end of by the end of our turn, then Wisp Drinker Vampire is going to see all of them come in and drain all of our opponents for 10, and we'll gain 10. Notice what that means. If our commander's tokens are able to trigger the Wisp Drinker Vampire, and we're paying 4 life to get at least 4 tokens, then Wisp Drinker Vampire gets us that life back immediately and costs each opponent that life. So it's like each opponent is paying for our tokens rather than us. Pretty sweet. And if we really want, 5 a white and a black to give all of our creatures with power 2 or less death touch and lifelink until end of turn. Now this does not give lifelink to our token vampire knights because they already have it. It doesn't give it to our commander either because our commander doesn't have power 2 or less. But it does give our... I hope I didn't misspeak there. Anyway, it gives those tokens death touch. Death touch is pretty sweet. Death touch, as I've often said, is a little bit of pseudo evasion. Because in a deck, in a format like Commander, when you have 40 life, if I attack you with 4 little 1/1s and they have death touch, you probably don't want to block unless you have some tokens of your own or other creatures that you want to die. You'd rather just take the damage because it's so little compared to the amount of life you have, if it means blocking is definitely a trade. Unless you have like an indestructible blocker, anything you block my death toucher with is also going to die. So you have to just not care about it dying or actively want it to die in order to be willing to do that, or otherwise you're just going to let it through. You're like, oh, you're attacking for 6 or 8? That's a lot of damage, but I'd rather take that than lose my creatures. I will let it through. So just having death touch has helped me evade you. It's a soft evasion, but it's a real thing. And when that happens, lifelink is on there too. Next up, we've seen Champion of Dusk. It actually makes us lose life in order to draw cards, but we can get that back in the form of our tokens, just a little bit of a roundabout way. And finally in this section is Crossway Troublemakers. 5 and a black for a 5/5 vampire that gives all of our attacking vampires death touch and lifelink. So rather than having to activate it and have it only affect our small creatures, this just gives it to all of our vampires, death touch and lifelink, as long as they're attacking. That includes all of our tokens, and that includes our commander, which does not have lifelink inherently. So a pretty great way for us to ensure we've got at least enough life to be able to pay for our trigger at the end step. We might even pay at the end step just to make 1 token, because why not? We've got plenty of life to do it. And whenever a vampire we control dies, doesn't have to be a non-token, we may pay 2 life, and if we do, we draw a card. So let's say we have 3 vampires, 3 token vampires die because we attacked with them. Well, they had lifelink, so we did damage, so we gained 3 life, but then they all died because they were blocked, let's say. So then we pay 2 life for each one of them, so a total of 6 life, which means we're only down 3 life, and we draw 3 cards. We lost 3 life and we drew 3 cards. That's 1 life per card. That's Necropotence as an exchange rate, and we don't even have to wait till the end step. That's extremely strong for the kind of vampires we've got going on here. And if they didn't have lifelink on their own, well, then they did because they were attacking. So Crossway Troublemakers is very powerful for us. Even triggers on itself and our commander. Consider that. So that is our vampire section. Let's talk about our vampire Typal section, which is right here. There we go. So this is all cards we just saw. Cordial Vampire cares about creatures dying and putting counters on our vampires. Legion Lieutenant is a vampire lord, so is Captivating Vampire, so is the backside of Bloodline Keeper. Sanctum Seeker lets us drain our opponents whenever our vampires attack. Champion of Dusk lets us draw cards and of course lose life based on the number of vampires we control when it enters. And Crossway Troublemakers gives our attacking vampires death touch and lifelink and lets us draw cards by paying life when they die. That is our Typal section for our vampires. But as you just saw a moment ago, we do have one other Typal section. We've seen vampires and knights. Let's talk now about just this plain old Typal section. It's because we have 2 cards in here that aren't linked to either type. Starting with Furdok Core from Lorwyn Eclipsed. This is a Manalith. It's a 3 mana artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color. But it doesn't stop there because this is a Kindred artifact, Shapeshifter with Changeling, meaning this card is every creature type, meaning this is a vampire and this is a knight. It's not a creature, but it is a vampire and is a knight. It's a vampire and knight permanent, which if you'll notice, some of our cards care about. For example, Smith and Swordmaster's Curry Favor ability, or sorcery, says gain X life and each opponent loses X life, where X is the number of knights you control. It does not say knight creatures, which means since it doesn't specify a type, it only specifies a subtype, it means knight permanents you control. Furdok Core is every type. It is an artifact. It's every creature type. It's an artifact, but it's also a knight because it's a knight permanent. It has that creature type. That's how Kindred works. It gives creature types to non-creature permanents, or non-creature cards, I should say. So Smith and Swordmaster would count Fur.Core Core in its calculation. Knight Exemplar, on the other hand, says other knight creatures you control have +1/+1 and indestructible. So it would not give indestructible to Fur.Core Core. But there are plenty of other things that that would still work with this. For example, Vidalian Wave Knight lets us put a 1/1 counter on each merfolk and or knight we control. So we can put 1/1 counters on Fur.Core Core with it, even though it can't use them. So interesting ways that this works. We just want to look for any of our cards that talks about specifying the card type. And if it doesn't, it just specifies the subtype, Fur.Core Core counts for it. So if we were to cast Fur.Core Core and we had something that triggered off of knight creature spells being cast, it wouldn't trigger it because it's not a creature spell. But if it was when you cast a knight spell, do a thing, we would do the thing because Fur.Core Core is a knight. It's just not a creature. But I mentioned a moment ago that Vidalian Wave Knight might put 1/1 counters on it, but it can't use them. Except we can pay 4 and it becomes a 4/4 artifact creature until end of turn. That artifact creature remains a knight and a vampire. So any 1/1 counters we might have put on this are now affecting that 4/4 power and toughness. And Knight Exemplar suddenly makes it indestructible and gives it +1/+1 because it is now a creature. In addition to being an artifact, in addition to having the changeling ability. So works with all of our stuff. Pretty fun. And at the very least, it's a manalith. 3 mana to tap for a mana of any color. That seems good to me. Next up, we have Renewed Solidarity. 2 and a white for an enchantment that is a little expensive of the cards I put in this deck, but this one just works so well for us. As it enters, we choose a creature type, and creatures we control of that type get +1/+0. So again, this is for creatures. It won't affect our Fur.Core Core until we animate that Fur.Core Core. So what type do you choose? Do you choose vampires or knights? Typically, I would default to choosing knights in this deck simply because there's more of them. It affects our commander and all those tokens the same either way. They're both vampires and knights. But we're likelier to see more knights, so I probably would choose that. However, you might get this late in the game when you have a bunch of vampires in play. Or maybe it's not that late in the game, but you've just drawn more vampires than you have knights. It's fine to choose vampires. I think overall that might be a little less powerful, but what's the best choice? It's the one that's the best choice at the moment. So you base your decision on your board. And if you really don't know, the good default would be knights. But what does it actually do besides giving those creatures +1/+0? At the beginning of our end step, for each token we control of the chosen type that entered this turn, we create a token that's a copy of it. So this is a token doubler for the tokens that we made this turn. We just have to wait to the end step for it to happen. But that's not where it ends. Renewed Solidarity's last ability triggers at the beginning of our end step. So does our commander's last ability, the one that makes our tokens. So since we control both of these abilities, and neither of them target, we don't have to worry about the order we put them in or choosing anything in the process. So the way we do this is we get to choose the order they go on the stack in. So we choose to put Renewed Solidarity on the stack first, and our commander's end step trigger on the stack second, so it will resolve first. Our commander will let us pay 4 life, let's say we do, and we'll make tokens based on the number of cards we drew that turn. Let's say we make 5 because we've drawn 5 cards that turn. Amazing. Then Renewed Solidarity will get a chance to resolve, and we have made 5 tokens this turn. So we'll make a copy of each of those 5 tokens. So we've now made 10 tokens. What that means is, I've said before, where you kind of want to be as a floor, you're probably willing to pay 4 life to make 3 tokens, and sometimes that can be fine, but you kind of want to pay a life per token. Well, this way, you can pay 4 life when you've only drawn 2 cards that turn, and you'll get those 2 tokens, and then Renewed Solidarity will resolve, and you're going to be able to make 2 more tokens. So you only need to draw half as many cards to get the same amount of value. Or you still go for drawing 4 or 5 cards, and you end up with 8 or 10 tokens. Very, very powerful effect. All of those tokens, by the way, are getting +1/+0. So yeah, Renewed Solidarity is our token doubler for this deck, which is why it's $6. But I mean, it's not Anointed Procession, which is, what, $50 or something? So yeah, that is our sort of general Typal section. And that's a lot of the cards we want to talk about for our game plan, but a big part of our game plan actually lies in our vegetables, in our support sections, particularly the card advantage one. So let's talk about that now. This is our card advantage section. As usual, I tag it as draw, just as a shorthand. It doesn't mean that all of these cards actually do the draw a card action, but many of them do because that's what our commander cares about. So we're going to start by talking about Skull Clamp. This is a single generic mana for an equipment that equips for 1 and gives the equipped creature +1/+1/-1. Now, what happens if you put that on one of your 1/1 tokens, absent any Lord effects? Well, it means it dies. And whenever the equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards. So in a way, Skull Clamp says once this is on the battlefield, pay us a generic mana and sacrifice an X1 to draw 2. It's not a sacrifice effect technically, but it works out to be the same. And being able to take a single mana and sacrifice one of your tokens, let's pretend we do that twice. So we've paid 2 mana, we've sacrificed 2 of our tokens, we've drawn 4 cards. Then we go to the end step, we pay 4 life, and we make 4 tokens. So we've doubled our number of tokens for only 2 mana. And we've also drawn 4 cards that we can use however we need to use them. Skull Clamp is an extremely powerful draw engine, especially in this deck. And worst case scenario, maybe we have creatures that we think are going to die or think are going to get blocked, or we have a bunch of Anthem effects that are making our tokens big enough that Skull Clamp won't kill them just by equipping them. But we've also got something that's giving them, like Crossway, the Crossway vampires that give them Death Touch and Lifelink. So we swing in with our tokens, they're Death Touching Lifelinkers. One of them is equipped with a Skull Clamp, so it's got a less of a toughness, but more power, so we're gaining more life off of it. And if we think it's going to die anyway for some reason, we just let it go into its death, and we'll draw 2 cards off of it, which helps empower our commander's end-step trigger, so we get more to replace it later. Deadly Dispute is next. This is an actual sacrifice effect. 1 and a black for an instant that lets us, as an additional cost, sacrifice an artifact or creature. Usually we're sacrificing creatures with this, but we do have a number of artifacts we're making, particularly those blood tokens that we saw earlier. Sometimes we don't want to discard a card in order to draw a single card from it. So we use Deadly Dispute, sacrifice that artifact, and that lets us draw 2 cards and make a treasure token. That treasure token is a tiny little bit of acceleration for us. Just hangs out, because this spell is, other than the sacrificing an artifact part, is Village Rites. But it costs 1 more, but it refunds it to us in the form of a treasure. So yeah, very strong. We've seen Evasion New Phyrexia. It lets us draw cards because Teferi lets us draw 2 and then discard 2 unless we discard a creature. Mind Stone is next. This is actually an acceleration piece, but we can trade it in for a card later. 2 generic mana for an artifact that taps for colorless mana. So this is a mana rock, an artifact that taps for mana. We can also pay 1, tap it, and sack it to draw a card. Something we'll probably do late game, or if we're just desperate to get 1 more card draw, and we're willing to throw away our Mind Stone in the process. We have an expensive commander, and a number of wheel effects, which are kind of big, and we're going to see some of those in this section. So usually our mana is pretty precious to us. But if it's late game, or we're really desperate, Mind Stone is here to help us out, drawing a card. Prophet's Eidetic Memory is next. 1 and a blue for a legendary enchantment that when it enters, we draw a card, and it gives us no maximum hand size. Now, I didn't fill the deck with these effects. I think we have 2 of them in our deck. But it's not so important to us to be able to keep an unlimited number of cards in hand. We're not running Reliquary Tower or Thought Vessel or anything along those lines, Decanter of Endless Water. Because in this deck, even though it seems strange, we don't mind if we're discarding cards. The cards themselves are good, but the fact that we've drawn them is at least as good, because our commander turns the fact that we drew them into tokens, which tokens are creatures that turn into damage. So yeah, Prophet's Eidetic Memory giving us no maximum hand size, sure, that's fine. But it's kind of more exciting that it just replaces itself, especially when combined with its last ability. At the beginning of combat on our turn, if we've drawn more than 1 card this turn, we put a number of counters on target creature equal to the number of cards we drew beyond the first. So it says X 1/1 counters, where X is the number of cards we've drawn -1, but that just means other than the first card, did you draw any extra cards? Well, choose a creature at the start of combat and put a number of counters on that creature equal to the number of extra cards you drew this turn. That includes this one on the turn it comes in. Sometimes this is quite a few. Proph's Eidetic Memory is a great reason for us to use our wheels or our other draw effects, if we can, pre-combat. Ayara, First of Locthwain, is next. A little bit of a challenging creature to play in this deck. Our like minority color is black, but Ayara is triple black. So even though we can cast her, sometimes a little challenging, but well worth it if we can make it happen. A 2/3 legendary elf noble for triple black. Ayara says whenever she or another black creature we control enters, each opponent loses a life and we gain a life. So Ayara comes in and drains our opponents for 1. But then we go to our end step, we pay 4 life, and we make a bunch of tokens, all of which are black. So Ayara drains each opponent, or drains our opponents for 1 life per token we make. Which means if we're sticking to our plan of trying to pay the 4 life if we can make 4 tokens, then that means we're going to pay the 4 life, then gain the 4 life back, and each opponent's going to lose that life again. So we've got another one of these effects going on. Ayara is great for this. In addition, we can tap her and sack another black creature to draw a card. It doesn't have to be one of our tokens, but our tokens are black. So we might as well do that and just turn that card draw into the possibility of replacing that token at the end step anyway. Since we're drawing a card, that means we've drawn 1 more card during that turn. So when we pay for our commander's end step trigger, we're making a token back, which probably replaces the one that we sacrificed, and replaces the life that we paid for it, assuming we, got 4 or more tokens into play from that. Next we have Brain Surge, which is sort of Brainstorm's big brother. 2 and a blue for an instant that says draw 4 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. So we are up 2 cards for 2 and a blue at instant speed, which is instant speed divination, which is quick study. But this is much better than quick study. It's this kind of selection. Again, we don't have to put 2 cards from our hand among those 4 that we drew back on top of our library. It does lock us in, the way that Brainstorm does, into knowing what our next 2 draws are, which may be challenging for us, but usually won't be. But most importantly, this is 3 mana to draw 4 cards. So our commander sees that we've drawn 4, so we're definitely going to make at least 4 tokens at the end step when we pay our 4 life. We're going to make 5 since we drew for the turn anyway. So yeah, Brain Surge, very powerful for us. Sets up our next couple turns, gets us cards in hand, helps our commander. We want it. Halia, Guided by Light, is next. 2 and a white for a 3/3 legendary human soldier. This is a Soul Sister. She or another creature or artifact we control enters, and we gain a life. So, like any creatures, including her, and any artifacts, that's so many things. We're going to be gaining so much life from her. And at the beginning of our end step, we draw a card if we've gained 3 or more life this turn. Interestingly, though, this is a weird way of phrasing an ability with an intervening if, which means we have to have gained this life prior to our end step in order for this ability to trigger at all. We can't say, at our end step, we stack this in such a way so that our commander can make some tokens. Halia will then see those tokens come in, gain us life, and that qualifies us to draw the card. Doesn't work that way, unfortunately. However, we can do the thing where at the end step, our commander makes some tokens, and Halia will gain us a bunch of life from that. It just won't necessarily qualify us to draw cards from the life we gain. But Halia also has Warp for a single white, which means instead of paying 2 and a white for her, we can pay just a single white. She comes in, when she does, gains us a life, and then at the end step, she exiles herself, and we get to cast her from exile on a later turn, sort of like with Adventures. What's nice about this is the delayed trigger from Warp is at the beginning of your next end step, which means it's the same time as our commander's end step trigger. So if we stack it so that Halia's trigger goes on the stack first, and Elenda and Azor's trigger goes on the stack second, therefore resolving first, we can have Elenda and Azor let us pay 4 life. We can make a bunch of tokens. Halia is still in play to see those tokens come in, so we gain life for each one that does, and then Halia's trigger sends her off to exile. So we can very likely pay a single white and make back the life that we would pay for our tokens just by having Halia come in. Warped in that turn. Very useful as a way for us to get our life back. And plenty of times in this game, we're going to be able to draw cards in addition to gaining all that life. Next up is Lauren of the Third Path. This is my favorite Reclamation Sage. 2 and a white for a 2/1 legendary human artificer with vigilance, and when she enters, she destroys up to 1 target artifact or an enchantment. So that's the Rec Sage part. This is just disenchant. We can also, once she no longer has summoning sickness, tap her, and we and an opponent each draw a card. So we can use this politically. We can say, hey look, I want to draw a card. You look like you want to draw a card. What will you give me if I choose you to be the one to draw this card? Will you leave me alone for a turn cycle? Will you make sure that when you attack this opponent rather than me? You know, people will definitely make deals with you. And if they say, no, I'm not going to make a deal, or, well, you're going to have to choose someone if you want to draw that card, that's true, you know. But we don't have to draw that card necessarily. Lauren can sit there and we can wait until they're more needy for it. Or we can just say, yeah, because the card draw helps us more. It turns into tokens for us. Anyway, Lauren can be used politically. We don't have to. And at the very least, she's blowing something up when she comes in. Next up is Midnight Clock. This is our first wheel, but it's also a mana rock. For 2 and a blue, we get an artifact that taps for blue, or we can pay 2 and a blue to put an hour counter on this artifact. Hour counters do not have an inherent mechanical meaning. They just are used by this card. At the beginning of each upkeep, we put an hour counter on this artifact. That's each upkeep. That's each of our opponent's upkeeps as well. And when the 12th hour counter is put on this artifact, we shuffle our hand and graveyard into our library, draw 7 cards, and exile the clock. So that means we go around 3 turn cycles to get 4 and then 8 and then the 12th. We can accelerate it if we have mana we want to pump into it. But generally, we just keep this around for a few turn cycles to tap for blue for us. And eventually, when our commander's out, we let this happen, or we time it so that this happens, and we draw 7 cards, meaning we go to our end step, pay 4 life, and we're making at least 8 tokens since we drew 7 cards plus the one for our draw step. That's pretty sweet, and that's why we run wheels in this deck. Another wheel is Spirit Water Revival. 1 in double blue for a sorcery that does several things. It says as an additional cost, we can waterbend 6. Waterbend means we pay 6 extra generic mana, but we can pay that mana by paying mana, by tapping artifacts 1 for 1, or by tapping creatures 1 for 1. Any combination of those. We can tap 2 creatures, 2 artifacts, and pay 2 mana. We can pay 5 mana and tap our commander, whatever we want to do. We can just tap 6 blood tokens, and that will pay the waterbend cost. What does the spell actually do, though? It draws us 2 cards. But if we paid its additional cost, instead we shuffle our graveyard into our library, draw 7, and we have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Either way, no matter what, we exile this at the end. So it is a wheel only if we pay the additional cost. Otherwise, it's a sorcery speed, 3 mana blue, draw 2 cards spell, which is divination. It could be worse. Interestingly, though, this is a little different from most wheels. It doesn't just give us no maximum hand size for the rest of the game, which, like I said before, may be relevant. You never know. It's a nice bonus, but we don't really care about it. But also, it does not say shuffle your hand and graveyard into your library. Just your graveyard, and then draw 7. So whatever we had in our hand, we also get to keep beyond Spirit Water Revival. We'll just draw 7 on top of whatever we have, and we've got no maximum hand size. So a very powerful spell for drawing cards for us. We've seen the Welcoming Vampire, draws us a card whenever we have a power 2 or less creature enter, once per turn. Windfall is next. This is 2 and a blue for a sorcery that says each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So if we have a hand of 3, including Windfall, we're going to cast it, discard 2, and if one of our opponents discarded 6 cards because they had 6 in hand, every player is going to draw 6, unless of course someone else had even more than that. So Windfall is a great way for us to, it's not a full wheel, but it is a good way for us to draw plenty of cards, especially if we've already been filling up our hand. If we are the player that has the most cards in hand, well then that's the number we're going to draw again, and that's going to be the biggest number we can get. So yeah, Windfall is a helpful wheel for us for only 3 mana. Ancient Excavation is another one of our wheels, in a strange way. So this is an instant for 2, a blue, and a black that says draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand, then discard a card for each card drawn this way. So this is sort of like loot equal to the number of cards in your hand. That means we could be throwing away all the cards we had and keeping all the ones we drew, or we could be throwing away all the ones we drew, or some combination of the two. A nice way of giving us good card selection, but also saying, how many cards do you have in hand? Well, you just drew that many extra, so that you can get more tokens during the end step. And because this is an instant, we can use this during our opponent's end steps as well, since that's when our commander triggers every turn. You know, most of the time we're not drawing a bunch of cards on our opponent's turns, but we sure can, and it's a nice surprise at their end step that we might pay 4 life and get some creature tokens in from this. It also has basic land cycling for 2. So if we really need some land early on, and this is not helpful to us because we're a few turns away from our commander, we can pay 2 and discard this to search for a basic land, put it in our hand, shuffle. We reveal it, of course. So yeah, sets up our mana to be what we need it to be, fixed for our commander to come out. And yeah, pretty sweet. Lethal Scheme is next. This card is really great for us. 2 and double black for an instant with Convoke. Convoke is similar to Waterbend, except that when we can tap creatures to pay for these costs, but it's not just the 2. Our creatures can either pay a generic each, or 1 mana of that creature's color, which is only relevant for our black pips. So if we tap 2 creatures that are black and 2 creatures otherwise, whether they're black or not, we can pay this entire cost without paying any mana. We just use our creatures to do it. And we want to do that because Lethal Scheme is an instant that destroys a creature or planeswalker, and then each creature we convoked it with connives. Conniving means to loot. We draw and then discard a card, but if we discarded a non-land, we put a 1/1 counter on the creature conniving. So we're a little bit interested in conniving away spells so that we can put counters on our creatures, but it's sort of more important that if we use 4 creatures to do this, we've drawn 4 cards. We did discard cards, but it doesn't make a difference. We drew them, so we go to our end step, our commander lets us pay 4 life, and if we used 4 creatures to convoke this, then it might be an opponent's turn, but we make 4 tokens for that 4 life, and that can be pretty sweet for us. Solemn Simulacrum is next. The Beloved Sad Robot is a 4-mana 2/2 artifact creature golem. When it enters, we may Rampant Growth. We search our library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. A great piece of ramp. And when it dies, we can draw a card. Very simple. Probably not going to draw us a card very early on, but we don't need that much draw early on. We need it once our commander's out. This helps us get there as well. Teferi's Ageless Insight is next in this deck. I went back and forth about this because it is a do-nothing enchantment. That is to say, an enchantment that comes down and doesn't change the board other than just sort of being there. But it really helps us out with much of what else we're doing in the form of drawing cards. So this is 2 and double blue for a legendary enchantment that says if you would draw a card, except for the first one you draw on each of your draw steps, draw 2 cards instead. So every time we draw a card beyond our card that we get every turn during our draw step, we double that, which means we're doubling the number of cards we've drawn, which means we're doubling the number of tokens that we're making from those card draws once we get to the end step. Yeah, just very powerful for us. It does require other cards to do something at all, but it's just so explosive, it just seems fun. Whispering Madness is another wheel, and it's really cool. This is 2 a blue and a black for a sorcery that makes each player discard their hand and then draw cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So just Windfall. Windfall all over again. But then it has Cipher. Cipher says you may then, after this is resolved, exile this card encoded on a creature you control. When that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. What the heck does all this mean? Cipher, you do it like this. You do its effect, and then you tuck Whispering Madness under one of your creatures. Let's say we put it under our commander. Our commander essentially now has a new line of text. When it does combat damage, we get to cast a copy of Whispering Madness for free. That's all it is. It's like it's an aura, but it's not targetable. It's in exile. So yeah, it just lets us copy and cast Whispering Madness over and over every time we do damage with the creature that we've chosen. We can't move it around. If that creature dies, it's in exile forever. But yeah, we might be able to wheel multiple times with this, and that seems pretty good. We've seen the Cavalier of Gales. It lets us brainstorm, thereby drawing 3 when it comes in. Champion of Dusk lets us draw a number of cards equal to the vampires we control when it comes in. Step Between Worlds is our next wheel. 3 and double blue for a sorcery that lets each player shuffle their hand and graveyard into their library. Each player who does draws 7 cards and exile Step Between Worlds. It's a May, so whoever doesn't want to do this doesn't have to, but we are definitely going to because it helps us with our commander. We can also plot this for 4 and double blue, which means at sorcery speed we can pay this cost, put Step Between Worlds in exile, and then on a later turn at sorcery speed, we can cast this without paying its mana cost. Not usually something we're going to be doing in this deck. Usually we want to just pay the 5 and get this to happen, but I guess there are some times when we might want to plot this while we're trying to build up enough mana to recast our commander because it was removed, and it just doesn't seem that likely. Step Between Worlds normally is not going to get plotted in this deck, so it might make sense to replace this with a spell called Game Plan. Game Plan costs 5 and a blue, so a total of 6, but less restrictively, to do exactly this, except for the May. But instead of having plot, it has assist, which means another player can pay up to 5 generic mana of the 5 and a blue that it costs. So even though that costs 1 more overall than Step Between Worlds, it does mean that another player who might be hurting for card draw might be willing to contribute a few mana, so it might end up being less costly than Step Between Worlds. Just another alternative. I decided not to include it because I think this one might be a little bit more usable, especially because it's guaranteed 1 less than the other one, and we'd have to sort of be hopeful for the other one to be cheaper, Game Plan. But yeah, either way, these would both be good for this deck. Next we have Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. This is a 3 and double blue Teferi Planeswalker with 4 loyalty, with a static ability whenever we draw a card, put a loyalty counter on Teferi, which is the only way we can put loyalty counters on Teferi, because his first ability is a 0 that lets us draw a card. So that does put a loyalty counter on him, and draws us a card, of course. We can also -2 him to make a 2/2 blue spirit creature token with vigilance that has, whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on this token. So oftentimes you play Teferi, you -2 him to make a token that will protect him. Next turn, you 0 him to draw a card, which puts a loyalty counter on him and a 1/1 counter on the token. Pretty good. And it's not impossible, it's not likely, but it's not impossible to get up to 12 loyalty with Teferi, especially in this deck that's drawing so many cards. When we do, we can -12 him to have target opponent choose a permanent they control and bounce it to their hand, and then take all of their other non-lands and shuffle them back into their library. So this is a pretty solid wrath for one opponent. If we do it not the opponent that's next in turn order after us, it might kill that opponent, because by the time we're able to get to 12 loyalty on our 5-mana Planeswalker, it's probably going to be mid to late game, if not late game. So if we hit our opponent that's on our right or that's across from us, it's pretty likely that we, and if not us, the subsequent player or players, are going to be able to attack and kill that player before they're able to rebuild their board. So Teferi Temporal Pilgrim, again, difficult, but not impossible to get to maybe just cause an opponent to lose the game. Pretty sweet. Plus, a guaranteed card every turn that we don't want to do one of these two. Crossway Troublemakers, we've already seen. Emergency Powers is our second to last wheel, and a sort of a favorite card of mine from Ravnica Allegiance. 5, a white, and a blue for an instant that does the wheel thing. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, draws 7, we exile Emergency Powers. So why is it worth 7 with a white mana? Because it has addendum, meaning it's an instant, but if we cast it during our main phase, we can also put a permanent card with mana value 7 or less from our hand onto the battlefield after we wheel. This is, at the very least, letting us put a land into play. That seems okay, just a little bit of ramp after we've gotten our wheel effect. Maybe we're able to put something big and powerful. We might get a Crossway Troublemakers, which means we've spent 7 mana to get a wheel and a free 6-drop into play. We might get Teferi. We might get Champion of Dust to draw us even more cards. Who knows? We might get Teferi's Ageless Insight and say, God, I wish I would have had that when Emergency Powers got played. But in any case, it's pretty unlikely we're going to get a hand with 7 non-permanent spells in it, non-permanent cards. So yeah, we at least get one thing into play. Finally, we have Commit to Memory. This is an Aftermath card, which means it's Commit, which we can cast from anywhere we're allowed to cast a spell, like our hand, and Memory, which has Aftermath, which means we can only cast it from our graveyard, and when we do, we exile it. So the way this normally plays is you cast Commit, then it goes to the graveyard, and you cast Memory from the graveyard, which exiles it. But it might be that we end up looting away or rummaging away Commit to Memory, meaning we only end up playing Memory. It's also fine because it's still got value once it's in our graveyard. But what does it do? So Commit is an instant for 3 and a blue that puts target spell or non-land permanent into its owner's library second from the top. So we can hit a spell on the stack, which means, like a counterspell, we can protect ourselves from something that might kill our commander or might be a board wipe. Or we can just get the scariest thing in the battlefield and put it back into its owner's library. We can even tuck our opponent's commander back into their library. Now, when we do that, they are allowed to put it into the command zone if they so choose. If they don't choose to, however, if they say, it's second from the top, which means I'll see it next turn and I'll draw it the turn after, then they've made themselves a mistake. This is something that a friend of mine did, and I tell this story every time I put this into a deck, but it's just, it lives in my mind. Because Commit to Memory has written on the same card as Commit the Text of Memory, which is a sorcery for 4 and double blue that is a wheel. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library and then draws 7. And of course, this gets exiled because it's an Aftermath card. So I had a friend who I tucked their commander with Commit, and they said, I'm not going to put it back in the command zone. I'll just draw it in the next turn. So the turn after that, I cast Memory, and since that commander was already in the library, Memory, causing them to shuffle their library, does not change the zone of their commander, which means they don't then get another chance to put it back in the command zone. So my friend just had to shuffle it away, and they were like, goodbye. So yeah, Commit to Memory is a lot of fun. Good protection, good removal, another wheel for us, helps out a lot. So that is our draw section, our card advantage section. I do want to make mention that I have separated out, just to show you, these 8 wheel effects that we have in our deck. A good place to put more if you want to do more. I don't think the deck actually needs more, but here's the place to put them if you want to swap them in and out. So yeah, just so you see, they are all in that card advantage section, as you just saw anyway. Next up, we have our acceleration section, which again, I've just tagged as ramp as a shorthand. Of course, we're running Soul Ring. It's 1 generic mana for an artifact that taps for 2 colorless mana. It's the symbol of the format. It's extremely powerful. We have an expensive commander and several expensive wheel spells, so of course we want to run this. And generally, this goes in pretty much any deck that doesn't punish you for running non-creature spells. So yeah. Wayfarer's Bauble is next. This is 1 generic mana for an artifact that if we pay 2 tap and sack it, we get a Rampant Growth. We search for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. Very good for us as a way to accelerate things out with our non-green commander. Arcane Signet is another mana rock. It's a 2 mana rock for that comes in untapped and taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. In this deck, that is white, blue, or black. So an untapped 3-color rock for just 2, very powerful. Of course, we're going to run it. Deadly Dispute, one of the things it does is make a treasure. We can certainly use that. But we were talking about 2 mana rocks. Felwar Stone is a 2 mana untapped artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. This is very, very good for us, because let's pretend all of our opponents are running nothing but red and green. Well, then this makes red or green, which means it's a 2 mana rock that comes in untapped and pays for any of our generic mana costs. That's still very good. But if anyone's playing black, well, then it also taps for our black costs. If someone's playing white and black, or someone's playing white and a different person's playing black, great. This makes 2 of our colors. And if, they've got all 3 of our colors, then this is just as good for us as our Arcane Signet. So very strong. I put this in any of my 3-color decks or more, sometimes for 2-color decks. So yeah, Felwar Stone is great for us. Knight of the White Orchid, we've already seen, lets us have a catch-up mechanic, but we can sure use it to accelerate in certain ways. Mind Stone is another 2 mana rock that we can sack to draw a card. We're also running all 3 talismans for our colors. Talisman of Dominance is what we use as an example. 2 generic mana for an untapped artifact that taps for colorless, already very good. We can also tap it for blue or black if we're willing to let it do a damage to us. The way this normally plays out is we just tap it for the colorless, unless we really need blue or black. And if we do, it's 100% worth that damage, because that 1 damage is the difference between being able to cast a spell or not. So it's like that spell has an extra cost of a single point of damage, or single point of life. Totally worth it to be able to make that spell come out, since we're not usually desperately in need of that. We have a pretty good mana base. But if we have to do it, it's worth it at the time, and we've got plenty of life gain in this deck to balance it out in case we were worried about it. Talisman of Dominance is for blue or black, Hierarchy is for white or black, and Progress is for white or blue. Otherwise, they're all the same. We've seen Furdok Core. It's a manalith, 3 mana rock that taps for 1 mana of any color, but it has Changeling and can be a 4/4 if we want to animate it. Midnight Clock is sort of a manalith. It's a 3 mana rock that taps for blue, and it's also a wheel for us. And the Solemn Simulacrum dies and draws us a card, but more relevantly, when it enters, it rampant growths us. So pretty helpful. That is our acceleration section. Let's talk now about our interaction, which again I've just shorthanded as removal. So Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares are essentially the same card with one difference. They're both instants that cost a single white mana that exile a target creature and give that creature's controller a kickback. Swords to Plowshares gives that creature's controller life equal to the creature's power, and Path to Exile lets that creature's controller rampant growth. So both are powerful effects. Unconditional removal for a single mana for any creature, and it exiles it. Seems great. Invasion of New Phyrexia is in this section because Teferi, on his -3, can sort of convoke away a non-land permanent. It seems pretty good. Emergency Eject is next. Some people like to run Generous Gift, 2 and a white to destroy a permanent and give that permanent's controller a 3/3 green elephant. Typically, I don't run land destruction in these decks, just because the kind of pods that want the power level of decks that I build aren't looking to have an experience where they get their lands blown up. So the nicer version of Generous Gift is Stroke of Midnight. It's 2 and a white to destroy a non-land permanent, but then that permanent's controller gets a 1/1 human token rather than a 3/3 elephant. But I say Emergency Eject is slept on as a better alternative to Stroke of Midnight, because it destroys a non-land permanent and then its controller gets a lander token, which is to say a Wayfarer's Bauble. It's an artifact that if they pay 2, tap and sack it, they get to rampant growth. I think this is very strong for this effect. In fact, it's kind of comparable to Path to Exile, except Path to Exile, even though it exiles versus destroys, Path to Exile costs 2 less and just gives them the rampant growth. Emergency Effect, or Eject, costs 2 more, but they have to pay that 2 themselves in order to crack the lander token and get their own rampant growth, and it hits any non-land permanent. So I think that some people say you should go for efficient removal rather than flexible. I think Emergency Eject sort of walks the line between the two. And yeah, not trying to blow up lands too much in my decks, with one exception, which we'll see in the land base. But speaking of lands, Imprisoned in the Moon is 2 and a blue for an aura that enchants a creature, land, or planeswalker and makes that permanent into a colorless land that taps for colorless mana and causes it to lose all other card types and abilities. So normally we take this and put it on the creature or planeswalker on the board that's the scariest. One of the most common ways to use this is by putting it on an opponent's commander. That means that commander is now a land and loses all its other card types and abilities. They can tap that land for colorless mana if they want, but unless they have a way to sacrifice or destroy their own lands, or to interact with Imprisoned in the Moon as an aura, their commander's shut down, at least for a while. So that really slows down their strategy, which is a great way to use interaction and give us a little tempo to get ahead. Lauren of the Third Path, as we've seen, is a Reclamation Sage. It comes in and naturalizes, or rather disenchants, an artifact or enchantment. Team Avatar is next. This is a really cool card. 2 and a white for an enchantment that says whenever a creature we control attacks alone, that creature gets a power and toughness bonus equal to the number of creatures we control until end of turn. This is like Angelic Exaltation, but it costs 1 less, and because I think includes the calculation with that creature itself. It doesn't say the number of other creatures you control. So this is cheaper and maybe better, just as good. Yeah, better because it's cheaper. So what we might use this for is if we've got, 7 of our Vampire Knight tokens in play, we can attack with our commander, and our commander is going to get +8/+8, since that's the number of creatures we have. Which, if our opponent doesn't have a flying blocker or any interaction, means they're taking 14 commander damage. This might be enough, Team Avatar might be enough with all of our tokens to swing in and just do commander damage enough to kill our opponent outright. Or maybe we attack instead of with our commander with one of our 1/1 tokens. It gets the +8/+8. And so now it's attacking as a 9/9 lifelinker. So even if it's blocked, we're going to gain 9 life off of that. Maybe that's more worth it to us. It just has to attack alone, which is a different strategy than most of the rest of our deck is going for. We're not really going with an exalted strategy, but a good alternative to us. But why is it in the interaction section? Well, because we can pay 2 and a white and discard it from our hand to have it deal damage equal to the number of creatures we control to target creature. So this is a surprise effect that can just remove something at instant speed and uncounterably, unless they have something that can counter an activated ability, because this is not a spell. So we're on the offense or we're on the defense. Either way. Void Rend is next. Very, very nice. A white, a blue, and a black for an instant that can't be countered and destroys an on-land permanent. It's just Anguished Unmaking that doesn't cost us life and can't be countered. We just have to spend blue mana to do it. Pretty good. Dion, Bahamut's Dominant, is next. Its third ability on the backside destroys a target permanent. This can hit lands. Again, I'm not trying to do that, but I can't change the card text, so that's why it's here. Hatham Kenway lets us O-ring creature off of each opponent's playmat when it comes in. Lethal Scheme destroys a creature or planeswalker, and we can convoke it, so we can draw a bunch of cards and maybe connive some counters onto our creatures. And of course, Commit to Memory has Commit, which doesn't just let us tuck non-land permanents, we can also tuck spells right off the stack. So that is our interaction section. We are running 2 Wraths. The Teferi Temporal Pilgrim one is its -12, which again, I said it's difficult, but it's not impossible, and it can completely clean out one opponent and maybe probably lose them the game. And we're running Time Wipe as our other Wrath. 2 double white and a blue for a sorcery that bounces a creature we control to its owner's hand and then destroys all creatures. This is here so that in case we need to wipe the board, we don't have to pay 8 mana just to get our commander back from the command zone. So we bounce our commander back to our hand. It is 6 mana again to play it, but that's what it costs. So getting around the commander tax with this is pretty helpful for us. So those are our Wraths, and that's our support section. Let's talk about all our supplemental sections for our game plan, starting with our Payoffs. These are cards that reward us for the thing we're doing most in this deck, which is drawing cards. So Prophet's Eidetic Memory, we've already seen. It lets us put counters on our creatures at the start of combat if prior to that point we've drawn cards beyond the first one during our turn. Teferi's Ageless Insight doubles all of our extra card draws beyond the one during our draw step. Vidalian Wave Knight puts counters on all of our knights whenever we draw any cards. Knowledge's Power, which I think is so cool, is 3 a white and a blue for an enchantment that gives all of our creatures a constant bonus equal to the number of cards we've drawn this turn. So that's variable each turn, and during our opponent's turns, unless we're drawing cards with instant speed effects like Brain Surge, we're not getting any bonus at all. But we're getting at least a +1/+1 during combat on our turn, since we will have drawn a card during our draw step. And if we're wheeling, our creatures are huge. That's not just our commander, but also all of our lifelinking tokens and everything else we've got sitting around. Knowledge's Power is very good. Psychosis Crawler is next. 5 generic mana for an artifact creature Phyrexian Horror with power and toughness each equal to the number of cards in our hand. So it is possible that we could kill this by emptying our hand. We try not to do that. But I do want to make mention that this is a characteristic defining ability that only checks when state-based actions are checked. So, or rather, state-based actions are the only way it's going to die. So if we were to cast a wheel effect that makes us shuffle our hand into our library, I know in that moment it feels like we have no cards in hand, but this won't actually check to see if it'll die or not until the end of that effect is done resolving, and that effect includes us drawing a fresh 7 or a fresh number of cards. So Psychosis Crawler is not going to be killed by us just doing a wheel effect, just so you know. In fact, it's actually going to love it, because whenever we draw a card, each opponent loses a life. This is just straight up life loss from our opponent's drawing card, or from us drawing cards, which we're going to be doing a lot of. Thanks, Psychosis Crawler. And we've seen Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. He gets loyalty counters rather whenever we draw cards, and his spirit creature token that he makes gets 1/1 counters whenever we draw cards. So those are our payoffs in the deck. We have a few ways of gaining life that we've seen already mostly. Authority of the Consuls, terrific card. A single white for an enchantment that makes all of our creatures, or all of our opponent's creatures, enter tapped, and whenever one of our opponent's creatures enters, we gain a life. So even though we can make quite a few creatures during our turn, especially if we've drawn a bunch of cards, the likelihood that we're going to be making more creatures than the combined total of our opponents making creatures is not super high. And if that happens, then great, we're ahead of the game because we've got so many creatures. Most of the time, though, we're gaining more life from letting our 3 opponents cast creatures than we would if we were just playing something like a Johnny's Welcome or a lot of additional Soul Warden effects to gain life from our own creatures coming in. So Authority of the Consuls, in addition, it's annoying. It makes our opponent's creatures come in tapped. Most of them won't like that, which means they might use removal on Authority of the Consuls, which means they're not using on something more valuable to us. So yeah, a very powerful effect for a single mana and gives us quite a bit of life. Ayara lets us drain our opponents whenever we have black creatures enter, including herself. So gains us some life from that. Halia is a Soul Sister, so we're going to gain life whenever she or another creature or an artifact we control enters. Lots of good stuff. Knight's Charge and Sanctum Seeker both care about us attacking with respectively knights and vampires, and each one that does is going to drain our opponents for 1. Wisp Drinker Vampire drains our opponents whenever we have creatures power 2 or less enter. And Crossway Troublemakers gives all of our attacking vampires Death Touch and Lifelink. There are other lifelinking creatures in the deck, particularly in the Considering section, but I don't put, generally, in my Lifegain section, I don't tag creatures with lifelink as... I don't tag them as Lifegain cards because they're in the deck because of that reason, not really to serve a role. Lifegain is about other ways we gain life. So cards that bestow lifelink on our creatures, much like Wisp Drinker Vampire does with their activated ability. That's why Crossway Troublemakers is in here and not, say other things. So that is our Lifegain section. We do have our drain cards, though, like Smitten Swordmaster, which does gain us life, but it's really in here for the drain. So Curry Favor lets us drain our opponents. Ayara drains our opponents when we have she or other black creatures enter. Knight's Charge and Sanctum Seeker when we attack with knights or vampires. Wisp Drinker Vampire when we have little creatures come in. And Psychosis Crawler whenever we draw cards at all. That's our drain section. We have a pump section, cards that make our other creatures bigger. So Cordial Vampire, whenever any creature on the battlefield dies, puts a 1/1 counter on all of our vampires. Teferi can give us an emblem that makes our knights have ward 1, but gives them +1/+0. Legion Lieutenant is a lord for our vampires. Prophetic Memory lets us put counters on our creatures for all the extra cards we've drawn during our turn. Captivating Vampire, Vampire Lord. Knight Exemplar, Knight Lord. Renewed Solidarity, +1/+0 for all of the creatures of the chosen type. Team Avatar, whatever creature attacks alone gets a huge bonus based on the number of creatures we control. Bloodline Keepers, other side, Lord of Lineage, is a vampire lord. Dion, on his backside, the first 2 chapter abilities of Bahamut, Warden of Light, put a 1/1 counter on each other creature we control. Hatham Kinway is a knight lord. Vidalian Wave Knight puts counters on our knights, and Knowledge's Power makes all of our creatures bigger based on the number of cards we've drawn during that turn. So those are our pump spells. We have a bit of a protection section, a little bit. Evasion of New Phyrexia keeps coming up because Teferi does so much. That emblem that gives our knights ward 1 is why it's here. Knight Exemplar makes our knight creatures, other than itself, indestructible, and Commit protects us because it operates in the counter spell space. We can stop a spell that would be targeting us or one of our things, at least for a moment. We also run the Swiftfoot Boots. The Swifties are 2 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 1 and gives the equipped creature hexproof and haste. It's possible that we go from 5 mana to 7 mana in this deck with like a Myriad Landscape or a Temple of the False God, something like that. So we might be able to cast our commander and still have a mana left over that if we've already cast the Swifties, we can go ahead and equip them and give our commander haste. But more relevant is the fact that we can give our commander hexproof. We can hexproof anything we want with the Swiftfoot Boots, but it's really here for our commander since having Ward 2 is good, but hexproof is better. That is our protection section. Let's take a look at our tokens. It seems like we would have a lot of token cards, but we're mostly relying on our commander to make a lot of tokens. So Evasion, Renewed Phyrexia, we make X 2/2 Vigilant White and Blue Knight creature tokens. Renewed Solidarity doubles our tokens at the end step if we made it tokens before its trigger resolves during that turn. Bloodline Keeper, on either side we can tap it to make a 2/2 Flying Vampire. Dion enters and makes a 2/2 Knight, and of course, as its last ability on the back resolves, it becomes Dion again and makes that Knight again. And Teferi, we can -2 to make these 2/2 spirits that get counters whenever we draw cards. So those are our token generating cards. We have a section of Evasion. We've seen both of these already. Dion gives all of our knights flying during our turn, and Herald of Hoofbeats gives all of our knights horsemanship, so essentially unblockable most of the games. That is Evasion. We have a section of outlets. Outlets are just ways that we can sacrifice our creatures. Not super relevant in this deck, we're not getting any kind of sacrifice synergies, but Deadly Dispute lets us sacrifice an artifact or a creature, both of which we have many of, to draw 2 cards and make a treasure. Ayara lets us sacrifice a black creature to draw a card, and Skull Clamp doesn't exactly let us sacrifice things, but it can equip to something, and many of those things are X ones, so we equip it and that thing dies and we draw 2 cards, so it feels like a sacrifice outlet. Just something worth noting. Our last section of spells is Recursion, and it's just Knight's Charge. We've already seen it. It lets us pay 8 mana in black and white to return all of our knights from the graveyard to the battlefield. Might be relevant, especially if we have just gotten hit with a board wipe and our commander's in the graveyard as well. So yeah, that covers every spell in our deck. As usual, we're going to talk now about our land base, starting with our basics. So we've got 7 plains, 4 islands, and 5 swamps, which is interesting because we actually have more blue in the deck than we have black, as you can see here in our build out. But even though we've got more swamps than we have islands, we do have more blue production than we have black production. The reason for that is because we have several cards like this. We've got these bicycle lands that both make blue. One makes black, one makes white, but they both make blue. So we've got a lot of coverage that way to shore up our blue production that we didn't need for these, we didn't need in our basics. And I wanted to make sure I ran plenty of black cards because we do have not just the need for black in our many black spells, but also many of our black spells like Cordial Vampire or Ayara are multiple black pips, so we want to make sure we can hit those as much as we can. However, I will also mention this. Right now, it is February of 2026. Secrets of Strixhaven releases in April, and it is rumored that Secrets of Strixhaven is going to have the last lands from the cycle of bicycle lands and tango lands that we've been looking for a little while. So right now, there is not a black-white bicycle land, but there will be. So when there is, probably a good idea to cut a plains and a swamp and put in the Orzhov bicycle land and the Orzhov tango land to replace them. It might be worth rebalancing your basics at that point. Probably you won't need to, but it will definitely shore things up for your white and black cards. And because we have 16 basics, 2 bicycle lands, and 2 tango lands, which you'll see in a moment, that means we do have 20 cards in the deck that have basic types, which is relevant for our check lands that we'll see in a moment. But first, let's talk about the bicycle lands. Irrigated Farmland is a plains and an island that comes in tapped. So it's got those basic types, which means we can search for this with our Knight of the White Orchid, since it is a plains, and it will come in tapped even though the Knight of the White Orchid doesn't need it to. So this is a good tap land early on, taps for 2 of our colors, and if we draw this late, we can always cycle it for 2. Pay 2, discard it, draw a card. Not only does that draw us a card, helping our commander out, but it also gets this land out of our hand if we don't need it later on, and we would rather have the card advantage. Fetid Pools works the same way, except it is an island swamp instead of a plains and island. So I mentioned we have, with the Bicycle and Tango lands and our 16 basics, 20 cards in the deck that have basic types. That's relevant for our check lands. We're using all 3 check lands. Drowned Catacomb is the example. It taps for blue and black, and it comes in tapped unless we control an island or a swamp. We've got plenty of islands and swamps. This Fetid Pools is both. Irrigated Farmland is an island, so we don't actually need basics in play to make these come in untapped. And I usually try to do about 20-ish lands that have basic types, including our basics, in order to put these check lands in, because they're just so much cheaper than the cards I would upgrade to from them, which are the slow lands. Slow lands are several dollars a piece, sometimes many of them, like 9 or 10 even, I think, is what Stormcarved Coast is going for. Anyway, the check lands are much cheaper, and in a deck like this, they're going to work about as reliably for less money. And if you wanted to upgrade the Bicycle lands, Shock lands would probably be a good choice for that. We're running all 5 of these fixing lands. So Command Tower, obviously, is a land that comes in untapped and has the same text as Arcane Signet. Taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity, white, blue, or black. So untapped tri-land sounds good to me. I would even take it tapped, like Path of Ancestry, a tap land that has the same text as Command Tower. But it also says, whenever we use its mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry one. So obviously our commander shares types with itself, but it is a Sphinx, a Knight, and a Vampire. We have 19 other creatures in our deck that have at least one of those types, which means there's 20 creatures, including our commander, we can cast with Path of Ancestry mana that will give us a scry. However, we cannot cast Furdock Core with Path of Ancestry and get to scry, because even though it has a creature type, it shares creature types with our commander, it is not a creature spell. It's a kindred artifact spell that has a creature type, but not a creature spell. Just to remember how changelings work. We're also running Exotic Orchard. If Command Tower is Arcane Signet as a land, Exotic Orchard is Felwar Stone as a land, an untapped land that makes 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So if an opponent has at least, the ability to make white from their lands, then Exotic Orchard can make white. We can tap it to use for our white spells. If they've got a way to make all colors, like they've got a Chromatic Lantern in play, then our Exotic Orchard can tap for any color. And if they have an Exotic Orchard of their own, then our Exotic Orchard taps for any color that our other lands tap for, because our orchard sees their orchard, which sees our other lands. Kind of cool. We're running Myriad Landscape. This is a tap land that taps for colorless, but we can also pay 2, tap, and sack it to search our library for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type. So in this deck, 2 plains, 2 islands, 2 swamps, basics of course. Then put those lands on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. So while this is slow, it comes in tapped, we have to pay for this, and it finds the lands that themselves come in tapped. It is us making 1 land drop for the Myriad Landscape and eventually having 2 lands in play. So it is acceleration, albeit slow. But it's not so slow if it's in our opening hand and we have a couple of other lands as well, because we're going to be able to get this to go off, we're going to be able to crack the landscape before we get our commander in play. So it helps us get to our commander a little bit sooner. So it's slow acceleration, but it is accelerating us. Similarly, Temple of the False God. I know not everyone likes this land, but this is an untapped land that taps for 2 colorless, like Sol Ring. It's a soul land. We just can't activate it unless there are at least 4 other lands in play that we control, so 5 lands including itself. So if our opening hand is a swamp and a Temple of the False God and no other lands, probably not worth keeping. But oftentimes we can get Temple of the False God into play on turn 4 or 5, and it's online because we've accelerated our lands in other ways. So being able to use this for our expensive commander or our expensive wheel spells is totally worth it. The fact that we can't tap it for mana early on and it takes up a land drop is unfortunate, but it's a downside that's balanced by a powerful upside. We are running all 3 of the Pain lands in our colors. Adakar Wastes is a land that taps for colorless, or it taps for a white or a blue if we're willing to let it do a damage to us. And if that looks like the talismans, that's because it is. These are the talismans as lands. Everything I said about them applies here as well. Adakar Wastes is for white or blue, Caves of Koilos for black or white, and Underground River for blue or black. So if you wanted to upgrade these pain lands, I guess you could do the shock lands. I might actually side grade these into pathways. Pathways are modal lands that come in as either the front face or the back face, and they're like the blue, it comes in untapped and taps for blue, or it comes in untapped on the back and taps for black. Those are fine as well. They are a little more expensive. I like the pathways and I often run them in my decks, but just to keep the price down, I went with the pain lands this time. But yeah, a good side grade might be those. We're also running these 3 scry lands. Temple of Deceit is our example. It's a tap land that taps for blue or black, and when it enters, we scry 1. So a guaranteed scry rather than the conditional but repeatable scry that Path of Ancestry gives us. The temples are tapped duels that give us a scry when they come in. Deceit gives us blue or black, Enlightenment, white or blue, Silence, white or black. And if we wanted to upgrade these, we could go to the Surveil lands, which are pretty nice and, are dual typed. So relevant for some things, like our check lands and our Knight of the White Orchid. We're running both of our Tango lands, just like we're running both of our Bicycle lands. Tango lands are dual-typed lands that come in tapped unless we control 2 or more basics. So when we add the new Tango and Bicycle lands from Secrets of Strixhaven, that does decrease our basic count to 14, but right now we're at 16, which is a sixth of our library. It's not unlikely that this will come in untapped for us. And if we find this with Knight of the White Orchid, and we've already got 2 basics in play, this will come in untapped, so it's an untapped white source or an untapped blue source for us, whatever we may need, or whichever we may need. Same is true for Sunken Hollow, for Island Swamp, therefore blue or black. If we wanted to upgrade these, I think Verges might be a cool upgrade for it. It does mean we have fewer typed duels, but Verges are pretty sweet, albeit more expensive. Arcane Sanctum is a tri-land. It's just a tap land that taps for all of our colors. So it's worse than Path of Ancestry, and therefore worse than Command Tower, and still worth running. Just a tap land that taps for all 3 of our colors. That's great. And if you wanted to upgrade this, Rafine's Tower, the Triome, is a good option for it. It's got all 3 basic land types, and it cycles for 3 generic mana. Finally, we have 3 utility lands. We're running Demolition Field, because as much as I spoke earlier about not running land destruction in most of my decks, it's good to have one answer to it, and to have it in your land base in a way that feels fair to people who are running a problematic non-basic, like someone who is stopping us from attacking because they have a Maze of Ith, or a Glacial Chasm that's stopping us from doing damage, or someone who's empowered themselves, like a Rogue's Passage with a Voltron commander. So some way that they're getting ahead with their game plan or putting us behind on ours. With a land, we should have one answer to that, and that's fair. So Demolition Field comes in untapped and taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap and sack it to destroy a non-basic land that an opponent controls, and that opponent gets to search for a basic land, put it on the battlefield untapped, and then shuffle. And so do we. So neither we nor they are down a land, assuming we had basics left, and we should. But we've gotten rid of the problematic non-basic, and both of us still have mana up since those basics come in untapped. This is something that most people will think of as, oh, that's fair interaction. It doesn't stone rain me, not in a real way, since I get a land to replace it. I think it's fine. Terrain Generator is next. This card is great in our deck. An untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2 and tap it to put a basic from our hand onto the battlefield tapped. So that's not our land drop for the turn. So if we're able to get more basics into our hand, we essentially pay 3 mana, 2 and tapping the generator itself, and we get to put 1 more land into play, which is a way of accelerating ourselves. And how likely is it we're going to have basics in our hand? Pretty likely when we're drawing so many cards and wheeling so many times, we're going to see a lot more basics than we normally could play in time. So Terrain Generator, especially early game, really helps us accelerate in ways that you wouldn't expect. If you've got Terrain Generator out and your hand has a non-basic and a basic in it, you just play the non-basic and use Terrain Generator to get the basic out as well. It doesn't matter that maybe they're both tapped. Next turn they won't be. Pretty great. Finally, we have Vault of the Archangel. This is an effect that's similar to a couple of things that we've seen already. An untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2 a white, a black, and tap it to give all of our creatures Death Touch and Lifelink. That includes our commander, so Lifelink on our commander is pretty good. Death Touch on all of our creatures, as well as Lifelink, very good. It does cost 5 mana, essentially, 4 here and tapping the vault itself, but a nice way to give ourselves pseudo-evasion, to get all that additional life gain that we might want for the end step, and at the very least, have a big swing, which is something we might need in a deck like this if we're trying to close things out. And that about sums it up. Again, I've made quite a few decks for March of the Machine, and I'm making a few more for the other non-face cards from the Commander products. So if you're interested in those next decks, let me know what kind of way you'd like to see me make them, and check out this playlist that's about to come up on the screen for all of my other March of the Machine Commander decks. So thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe, ring the bell if you want to be notified when I put up more videos. Leave a comment if you'd like to, let me know something. And remember most of all that Magic is fun. You should play more Magic.